Welcome to All Grown Up Now, Tales of a Checkered Past. I'm Kenneth D. King, podcasting from my studio near Union Square in New York City. This podcast is an evolution of the tale, All Grown Up Now, A Friendship in 3 Acts. This is Season 2, and it's called Tales of a Checkered Past. It's a collection of short stories from my salad days on up to the present. In each podcast, another self-contained story will be presented. Enjoy. For episode 96, I bring you a piece that I call Making Things. There's a quote in the Gnostic Gospels attributed to Jesus. It goes something like this: "If you bring out that which is within you, it will save you. If you deny that which is within you, it will destroy you." This particular passage has resonated with me in different ways depending on what's going on in my life. It has come to mind recently in regards to making things. I realized how, over my lifetime, making things has saved me. From as early as I can remember, my refuge was in making things. Initially, I made doll clothes, but other things came later. Even before I was in school, I remember making things like using scraps from Miss Ann's sewing to make clothes for Barbie or my troll dolls. Egg cartons were pressed into service to make furniture, which I would then upholster with more scraps of fabric and cotton balls for padding. Popsicle sticks were my source of lumber for building tables and other items. Thread spools were used to make stools and lampshades. Grandma introduced me to embroidery early. First, she taught me cross-stitch, which was a fad back then. Then we made more advanced projects. With this skill, I helped Miss Ann embroider a cross-stitch quilt kit that eventually ended up on my bed. Now, Miss Ann was conflicted about me doing this. It was a sissy thing to do, but she didn't want to do it all herself. Grandma also taught me knitting, some crochet, and hairpin lace. Miss Ann protested each and every one, but was glad for the afghans and ponchos that I made for her. When I was a teenager, I started sewing clothes for myself. Now, Miss Ann sewed for my sisters, but refused to make me anything. Boys' clothes were too difficult, she claimed. When I started making my own clothes, I understood. Miss Ann hated sewing, and the clothes she made were, as a rule, extremely simple. Just side and shoulder seams, back zip, facing, and zipper. So yes, to her, even a basic shirt was too much effort. Besides, I imagine I would have outgrown it before she'd finished it. In high school, I took a class called Bachelor's Economics, which was the boys' version of home ec. It didn't sound quite so Nelly calling it that.
Uh-huh.
This was the only class where the jocks stopped bullying me and paid me any attention. They saw that I already knew how to sew on a button, sew a slip stitch, and put up a blind hem. They tried to get me to do their homework, but I told them to go to hell. Then it was back to being bullied again. In this class, though, my teacher encouraged me to try to make a shirt. She told me that if I read the guide sheet and followed the directions, she was sure I could do it. So I bought some blue chambray and an easy shirt pattern, and off I went. After making that first shirt, I was hooked. This started a path of reading everything I could find about this craft. Most of what I know, I was first exposed to in books. I learned from reading and making more things, and then making even more things. Because she was house proud, Miss Ann always had projects going on. Usually, it was refinishing and reupholstering a piece of furniture that she got from her trips out junking. I would hover close and watch and learn. I learned upholstery and refinishing. She even hand-caned a set of chairs once. I was fascinated watching her soak the cane in glycerin water and then weaving the seats right onto the chairs. Dad had a workshop in the basement where he built furniture and other odd things that Miss Ann had requested for the house. I was allowed to use his shop as well. This led to my first power tool. One Christmas when I was 9, I got my own toy electric jigsaw that actually cut wood. Now, these days, this toy would no doubt be banned from the market, as it could also cut through fingers. But at the time, it was one of the boy toys that I got that I actually liked. I guess my parents bought it for me in the vain hope that it would make me less of a sissy. Now, understand, I used my new jigsaw to cut out little wood platforms for Barbie-sized platform shoes, or complex parts for a number of doll-sized furniture projects. But not once did I make any of the suggested, meaning boy-centered, projects that came with this saw. My parents couldn't have predicted this? In my early 30s, I went into therapy. In therapy, we looked at my family history. In this exploration, a surprising pattern emerged. Before I continue now, I need to say that back in the day where I came from, it seemed like everyone's dad had a workshop. That said, I'll continue. Miss Ann's father, who died long before I was born, had a workshop in the back of their garage where, as Miss Ann said, he hid out from Grandma. Grandma wore the pants in the family, she said. While in hiding, he made furniture for their house and also, with his brothers, made all of the woodwork on the altar area for the Lutheran church where my parents married and later where I was baptized. Dad's father, the one I knew as he was still alive, also had a workshop where he built furniture and made other things as well. Miss Ann said that the shop was where Grandpa hid out from his wife, Gertie, who died in 1949. She would also say that Gertie wore the pants in that family as well, but she only said it when Dad wasn't around to hear. Dad regarded his mother as a saint and would not hear any criticism. Grandpa's second wife, Mary, who Dad hated, didn't care a bit what Grandpa did. Life was all about her. I don't know if Grandpa made her any furniture. She didn't care about any of that. Mary had 3 sons who were no good layabouts who didn't ever do a tap of work. After Grandpa died, since the sons didn't do anything but collect dust by not working, and therefore wouldn't be needing any tools, the estate shipped us Grandpa's large tool chest, packed with all sorts of tools for metal as well as woodworking. So yes, the workshop was where Dad hid out. The workshop was where I also hid out and made things with my beloved jigsaw. I wish I had the jigsaw to this day. The size and how it operated would be ideal for a small New York studio. Now, in Kansas, I also hid out in my bedroom making things. This continued when we moved to Oklahoma. Sadly, the jigsaw didn't survive the move to OKC. Besides, there was no basement for it, so I focused on fabric and textile-related projects. But as a pudgy sissy boy who wore braces on my teeth and was bullied every day of my life in Oklahoma, this was my refuge. Miss Ann would shriek that, "You can't make any money with that damn Barbie stuff!" But to me, that wasn't the point. With Miss Ann and her alcoholic, wife-beating second husband battling it out, Barbie gave me an escape. In my mind, she was 27, lived in a big city, drove a convertible, went to the opera. She went to restaurants and theater and only owned evening clothes. But playing with Barbie was something I knew never to talk about. That said, the time spent making things for Barbie's fantasy life was the only time in my adolescence where I felt calm and competent, in control, safe. So I continued the family pattern by hiding in my workroom. One day my therapist remarked that I hadn't taken up drugs or alcohol or attempted suicide. He said that statistically these things are what people growing up in such a situation would end up doing. He asked me exactly why and how I managed to avoid it. My response was that I understood that drugs and alcohol were what was causing the chaos in my life. And yes, I also was lucky enough to have a voice of reason to listen to, Miss Ann's lawyer, Harry. But I also had the refuge of making things. The question of my career, what I would do when I grew up, was the topic of many conversations in my adolescent years. Miss Ann was convinced that I was lazy and I wouldn't amount to anything, so she felt she needed to decide. Miss Ann desperately wanted me to become a pharmacist. My older sister was supposed to be a doctor, which she didn't do, and Kathy, my beloved younger sister, was supposed to be the veterinarian. She works in a veterinary clinic, so yes, that happened. With me being a pharmacist, Miss Ann would be set for life. However, I wasn't buying it. I observed Mr. Bowman, our ancient pharmacist. He looked like a dried-up vulture. Big, beak-like nose, long, skinny neck with a huge Adam's apple, hunched over the prescriptions counter. He seemed to be the most miserable man on the planet. The one and only time I ever saw him smile was on the day he retired. I understood that if I were going to be a pharmacist, this is how I would end up. And I desperately didn't want that. Miss Ann enrolled me into pre-pharmacy in college, which lasted exactly 1 week. At the end of that week, I went over to the admissions office and changed my major to undecided. Later, I decided on fashion merchandising and got no end of grief from Miss Ann because of it. Now, my dad used to tell me to choose my career well because I'd be doing it for quite a long time, so I should at least enjoy it a little. I reminded Miss Ann of this. She shot back that you don't have to enjoy work, that's why they call it work. I found my niche in this field, in window display. It was the closest I could come career-wise to making things for a living. And the mannequins, well, I had life-size dolls to play with now. For someone starting out in Oklahoma, it was the closest job I could get working in fashion and getting paid for making things. But there came a time when I understood that I had gone as far as I could go in Oklahoma City. And then fate stepped in. The move to San Francisco widened my horizons greatly. There was a big, full world where I could explore window display on a greater scale than I did in OKC. However, in that wider world, I discovered the pitfalls of working in corporate America. I've written in other podcasts about my crazy boss Carmel and the insanity that surrounded working for him. Early in my time at Macy's, I was able to disappear into projects so I could tune him out. My particular specialty, which was encouraged, was what we call the museum cases. They're also called vitrines. What appealed to me about creating museum cases was it was a tiny world, a cube that measured roughly 20 by 20 by 20. It was Barbie-sized and allowed my imagination to run wild. Macy's, California at the time was at the tippy top of the window display heap, so we had the budgets and the time allowed to do some good work, and I took full advantage. In our store, we had an absolute crowd of the jointed wooden artist mannequins, which were sort of Barbie-sized. The first time I got to create a museum case was for the electronics department. The product was the Atari electronic game Space Invaders. We're talking 1983. I created a crowd of futuristic silver and gold robots with these little mannequins. They surrounded the Atari game box, and I lettered the outside of the museum case, "They're coming for you." It was a hit. So I got to indulge my love of Barbie in small scale as well as full scale. But there was the problem of the crazy boss. I said before, I had a chance to kill him and make it look like an accident, and the only reason I didn't was that I believe in reincarnation. But again, you've heard that story before. About this time, my friend Mark, who got me the move to San Francisco, got me a commission for a Mother the Bride dress. I've told the story about that in other podcasts, but the takeaway here was that I could make money by sewing. It was an epiphany. I started my business out by making hats and accessories. Then I evolved into making clothing. When the demand for clothing started, I understood that I needed to go pro. In other words, get some serious education. I was what I would refer to as a talented amateur. There comes a time, though, when talented amateurs need to make a decision to stay amateur or dig in and go pro. That's when I studied couture pattern making with my teacher, Simone. From her, I learned the rules about pattern making, an understanding of anatomy and how clothing, if it's to be successful, needs to fit and move with the anatomy. Her training made everything else from then forward possible. In short, I went pro. In my fledgling business, I also learned about multiple revenue streams. The posh LA store was, for a time, my only revenue stream, so when they said jump, I'd have to ask, how high? I understood that since they were my only revenue stream, I really worked for them, not myself. That was not my intention. That had to change. The change came serendipitously. Sandra Betzina, the Auntie Mame of the sewing world, insisted that Marcy Tilton of the Sewing Workshop have me teach a class. And that's where it started. But it grew to a sewing series on PBS called Sewing Today. Nancy Fleming, Miss America 1961, was the host for all 26 episodes. And from her, I learned how to be comfortable on camera, how to do voiceover, and how video worked. Sewing Today led to my first book deal, and other opportunities sprang from it. More revenue streams. When moving forward in my career, I never could really predict what would come next. But in retrospect, the opportunities presented to me always revolved around making things, teaching, investigating, writing about, communicating about, and actually making things. So, looking back, making things has been my career. Miss Ann used to yell at me versions of, "You can't make any damn money with those damn Barbie things." But she was wrong. In 2003, I was sharing a place in New York, traveling back and forth, looking for a way to make a leap from San Francisco. People thought I was foolish wanting to move from the Bay Area, but I understood that I had gone as far as I could go. Then fate stepped in. I was approached by a toy company in the Bay Area that was developing a new Barbie-sized fashion doll. They proposed that I develop an evening outfit for this doll. I never got to see the face, but I just got to see the body. The plan was that if it went forward, they would manufacture it in China and I would hawk it on QVC. Now, this part of the deal I wasn't enthusiastic about, but getting paid $3,000 to make a Barbie-sized evening outfit, I was down with that. When I was working on this project, every now and then, I'd look up towards heaven, laugh, and shout, "And you said I couldn't make any money with this Barbie stuff!" I delivered the project early February 2004. The woman in charge was going to the toy fair in New York, and she was going to be looking for office space. I told her of my search for a place to move to, along with my price range and what area of Manhattan I wanted to land in. So she saw something that looked promising. Could you think of me? Friday the 13th of February, there was a message on my machine. "We found your place. They're emailing you photos." The next morning, I opened the email, saw the photos, and as they say, that was that. So, making Barbie clothes got me my studio in New York. And that has brought all sorts of new things to my life. In 2019, I was commissioned by the fashion editor of New York Magazine to make some looks from the collections for Barbie. They were doing an article on Barbie as influencer. This project really got me back into making Barbie clothes for fun and profit. It also began the running story on Instagram of my assistant and her supporting cast of characters. I kept making these tiny outfits all through 2019 and up into 2020. Not only was it fun, it allowed me to escape the craziness that had taken over the country to create and live in this tiny little story occupied by my assistant, the fitter, the bodyguard, Zombie Francie, Crazy Bella, and the rest of their friends. And then came COVID. The lockdown hit New York first. Being forced to stay inside and stay away from people forced me to occupy and amuse myself by making things. Whenever I'd feel a wave of panic coming on, whether it was from the COVID or the political situation, I'd go into my studio and make more tiny clothing. I produced what seemed like bushel baskets of tiny little clothes in those first weeks. Was also able to create Instagram stories for Crazy Bella and her cohorts, most notably the blackmail plot against her, which had several people calling me to ask, was I okay? The answer, of course, was no, I was not okay. This was the only way I could cope. During the pandemic, I read about other people eating too much or drinking too much or smoking too much pot. Now, I don't judge, as we all needed to do what we needed to do. But again, it was only later that I realized I was doing it again. I was disappearing into the refuge of making things. The other occupation I engaged in during that time was making videos. I understood that I needed them to teach effectively online in the fall at FIT. However, once I realized that I had a product I could sell in other applications, I calmed down. So again, making things came to my rescue. I had a little more experience, but in following the path of making things through my career, I had learned another skill, making video. The video has become another revenue stream, which has saved my ass. Looking back at my career, I've realized the truth about that quote from the Gnostic Gospels. Again, here it is. If you bring out that which is within you, it will save you. If you deny that which is within you, it will destroy you. As it is, when people ask me about retiring, I respond that I retired when I quit my last real job back in early 1987. I do what I do for fun and profit. It's what I would do if I never had to work again. My life's work has centered around my craft, making things. This is the hub of the wheel of my career, the spokes that radiate out from the hub, creating couture, writing books and articles, teaching, making videos, making doll clothes, all connect back to the central idea, and that is that I make things. I love making things, and I have loved making things as long as I can remember. Researching the making of things, communicating what I've learned about making things, developing and improving the body of knowledge in my particular area of making things, making my livelihood from making things. These are the rewards of persistence. Persisting itself has been easy because I love what I do. If I had denied my desire to make things and done something else, like becoming a pharmacist, it would have destroyed me. I would have ended up like Mr. Bowman, sad, miserable, and only smiling when I retired. So, for me, bringing out that which is within me has saved me. And for that, I'm deeply grateful. Thanks for listening. You can get the audiobook All Grown Up Now on iTunes, Audible, and Amazon, or from my website, allgrownupnow.com. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play. If you have any questions, you can reach me through the website, allgrownupnow.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Kenneth D. King, on Facebook at Kenneth D. King Design, or on my main website, kennethdking.com.